Good morning, Brant class. Today we are going to be talking about volume, but let's back up and talk about area so we can see how area and volume are related. So area is the space inside a two-dimensional shape, like a rectangle or a square, something that is a flat shape, and it's measured in squares. Whereas volume is the space inside a 3D or three-dimensional shape. That means like a shape that has length, width, and height as well. So they're both the space inside a shape. It's just area is for two dimensions, and it's measured in squares, meaning you measure area based on how many squares can fit in that 2D shape. So for example, if this is 4 units here, I would have 4 rows, and this is 5 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, then I can fit 20 squares in there. So it's 20 square units is the area of this 2D shape, that rectangle. But this three-dimensional shape, we have to measure the space inside this three-dimensional shape with a three-dimensional shape, a cube. And so how many cubes can fit in here? Well, if I have 6 rows here, or this would be 6 columns along the length, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, and then I have 3 is the width here, so 3 along that side, and then 4 high, so 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and then I just need to finish my drawing here. You can see how many cubes would be in this shape. That would be the volume. So if I look just at the bottom layer, like if this were a house and this is the first floor of the house, I see this first floor has 6 cubes along the front, and then there's 3 rows basically. So 6 times 3 is 18. So there are 18 cubes in the bottom layer. And since this is a rectangular solid, each of these 4 layers has the same number of cubes. So it's 18 times 4 because there are 4 layers. That layer has 18 cubes, that one has 18, that one has 18, and that one has 18. So 18 times 4, let's see, 20 times 4 is 80, so this should be 72 cubes can fit in here. So we say cubic units. So that's the difference between area and volume. Area, space inside a 2D shape, and volume, space inside a 3D shape. So let's focus on volume here on the next page. So now I have another rectangular prism here, another 3D rectangle, and I've labeled the dimensions. We need to make sure that we're speaking the same language when we're talking about the dimensions. So I call this front side the length, and then this diagonal line the width, and then the height is how tall it is or how many layers it has. So how can we figure out the volume inside here? Well, we need to picture how many cubes could fit in here. So if we look at just the number of layers, there are 4 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. So now I have 4 layers, just like the 4 layers of a cake. If I can figure out how many cubes are in one layer, I just multiply that by the number of layers. So if I look at this bottom layer, 5 is the length. So I'll make 5 columns. And then 2 is the width, so there would be 2 columns on the side here. Let me just complete my drawing. And now I'm going to look at this bottom layer again. So this bottom layer has 5 cubes along the front, and then there's 2 basically rows of 5. So to find the bottom layer, 2 times 5 equals 10 cubes in the bottom layer. And then, now that I know that there are 4 layers, I can take 10, the number of cubes in the bottom layer, and multiply that by 4. So 10 times 4 equals 40 cubic units in the entire shape. So that's the way to do this using multiplication, but you might have also thought this as an addition equation. Once you find the number of cubes in the bottom layer, 10, here I'll write ADD for addition equation. So I know there are 10 cubes in the bottom layer, and then there are 4 layers, so there will be 4 layers of 10, 4 copies of 10. 2, 3, 4. So I can write this as an addition equation as well. 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 equals 40 cubic units. Or I can write this as a multiplication equation with 2 times 5 getting me the number of cubes in the bottom layer, and then I multiply that by 4. 2 times 5, of course, is 10, and then 10 times 4 is 40 cubic units. So this 2 times 5 here, that tells me the number of cubes in the bottom layer, right? We often call the bottom layer the base. So we can find the number of cubes in the base, in this case 10, multiply that by the number of layers, in this case 4, and then we get the total number of cubes in this rectangular prism. Well, this leads us to being able to come up with a formula, an expression we can use to find the volume of any 3D rectangular prism. So we just took the width, 2, multiplied it by the length, 5. Whoops, I wanted to put an L there, right? Width times length times 4, the height. You multiply the width times the length times the height, and you will find your capital V, your volume. 2 times 5 times 4. And really, you can do these in any order because you know from multiplying numbers that you multiply numbers in any order and you're always going to get the same product. So I could do length times width times height, or I could do height times width times length. It doesn't matter. You can multiply them in any order and you'll get the volume. So let's see that in one final equation. So using this formula, volume equals the length times the width times the height, we can find the volume, the space inside this 3D object, without having to draw the cubes. If you like drawing the cubes, go for it. But we just need to find each of these dimensions. So the length here is, whoops, I did an ampersand instead of a cursive L. I do a cursive L because if I do just a lowercase l like that looks like the number 1, and that's a little confusing. So we do a lowercase cursive L here for the length. So the length here is 10, and the width is 3. And then the height here is 5. So 10 times 3 times 5 should get us the volume. And this works because 10 is the length, 3 is the width. 10 times 3 should give us the number of cubes in the bottom layer. And sure enough, 10 times 3 is 30. So there would be 30 cubes in the bottom layer. 10 along the front, and then 3 rows of these 10 cubes, and 3 rows of 10, that would be 30 in the bottom layer. And then the 5, the height, tells us that there are 5 layers. So 30 cubes in the bottom layer times 5 layers, that would be 150 cubes altogether. 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 30. 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 150 cubic units. We would be able to fit 150 cubes inside this space, and so that is the volume of that figure.